Welcome, happy Friday. It's our pleasure once again to host a speaker in our series on the topic of urban Asia. And so the latest one that we have comes from our very own, campus' very own Glenn School of Public Policy. So Hongtao, welcome. It's very happy to have you. As you can see, the topic is local leaders, career path network, and intercity collaboration in China. And should indicate for you some of the themes that he's been doing in his research, which have a lot to do with policy knowledge diffusion and processes of actors and networks within policy diffusion, if I'm not mistaken, in different places in the United States and also in China. So I don't think I won't take up any more time than that. I just want to get you started. Sure. So we'll leave it at that. But we have a slight kind of rule. We'll say it's a rule. At the end of the talk, the grad students will ask questions first. Sure. Yeah. And we're trying to institute this, and it's actually been really, really great. And so we'll continue with that this time too. And then we'll open it up for all. Okay. All right. But yeah, welcome.
First of all, thank you, Max, for the invitation. It's an honor to be here to meet the colleagues and friends and students here in the Department of Geography. So we've been neighbors for a long time. And actually, I visited here a few years ago for a dissertation defense from a student here, Shang Chen, and he graduated from here. I was on his external faculty representative to make sure that the process was fair. So I can definitely guarantee you that the process here was really very good. Good students, and then he graduated and is a successful scholar. So I'm glad that I come here and actually meet you and then present my research. So today's research is slightly different than the schedule, but it's still on the same theme on a local collaboration network at the city level. So I'm basically looking at the local leaders career path network and intercity collaboration in China. So this definitely fits in the urban Asia theme of the Locum series. Just something about my research agenda. I study public administration and public policy at intersection with energy and environment. So there's something that in our terminology, collaborative governance, network governance, local government, and performance and career trajectories, mainly about how local leaders and say, mayors and local managers, how do they move around geographically? That's somehow the geography element of it. And then how they work together horizontally, that's sort of also geography related. And that sort of PA aspect. Public policy, I study the conflict diffusion tools and termination of policies, and then analysis and evaluation. These are happening in the context of energy environment. So I cover broad topics around energy environment. So I open myself to most issues related to energy environment. My context is United States and China. So my early career, I was hired as an energy policy scholar. I was didn't do much on China, but in the last 3 years, I shifted my agenda so that's more like 50% China, 50% US. So some of the work are heavily network driven. I believe a lot of colleagues and students here are doing some network related research. This is one example that I do in China, also local China, in Dongguan City, about the interagency collaboration related to energy environment. This is obviously related to Water Affairs Bureau, Environmental Protection Bureau, and Urban Construction Development Agency. So they have this collaboration network around water infrastructure development. So I went there and did a survey in 2015 to interview 40 agencies to see who are you working with in your implementation of local policies. So that was survey-driven network study. I also studied fracking. This was an interview in China, in Chongqing, where there's hydraulic fracturing happening. So I went there and interviewed provincial leaders and local environmental protection agency nonprofits to see how things are actually happening. Are people having conflict with each other? How do they engage in policy advocacy to shape policy making? So that was, decision-making networks. To make sense, this is PetroChina, one of the biggest oil and gas company there. This is Shell, and then they're engaged in shale gas exploration in China. This is describing their network of do you agree with each other or not. So that's another example of my study. And this is low carbon governance network in Zhenjiang City in China. This is non-published work was trying to study the network structure among how agencies are collaborating with each other through working on the same policy document. So we look at the document, text analysis, by looking at the document to see which agencies are working with other agencies to draft this network structure. And we collect a large sample of these to use as independent variable to explain performance of these collaboration networks across geographic scales. So that's my last example of my network research. So in this context, I was looking at for this study, it's related to this stream of research in looking at these interlocal interactor collaboration networks. Specifically, I look at why do local governments enter into intercity environmental agreements in the context of China's urban governance. And then specifically, I look at the local context of Pearl River Delta, which is one of the largest economic engine in China. If you know, Hong Kong is there, Guangdong province is there, so that's where a lot of activity, industrial development are happening. So I look at how local government are working with each other within that geographic context. So basically, this is highlighting some of the intersection of local sustainability and in China, and these are the elements of my research. Okay, so why study interlocal collaboration? And this is situated in our own discipline in studying why governance matter. So we look at collaborative governance as a theory as it related to network governance because in metropolitan governance, as the policy actions done by one government is not sufficient because of the geographic spillover of policy effect. The actions taken by one government is going to spill over into other cities surrounding it. Say Columbus, if Columbus take an action, it's going to affect Worthington for sure, right? So typically this is done in a larger scale that requires interlocal collaboration. That's why this is important. So that's why I study interlocal collaboration. So given that this is my dependent variable, it's something that I want to explain. Why do government collaborate? I want to look at the role of managers as entrepreneurs, facilitating the collaboration across government. How do they help facilitate the breakdown or reduction of fragmentation across these local governments? So in the U.S., a lot of people are looking at managers' professional network, but the coding scheme was really very simple, presence or not, or basically a dummy variable operationalization. There's a lack of attention to the career path of managers. So I want to emphasize the role of career path of managers in facilitating the interlocal collaboration. So why does this matter? So this is part of my research agenda in looking at how people move around from location to location. So think about in the U.S. context, university presidents move around, right? President Gordon Geese, if you still remember him, right? He was our university president. He moved to, was it Brown and then came from Brown, and then came to Ohio State, and then West Virginia, and then come back, and then West Virginia, right? So it's sort of moving more. Yeah. So that this kind of movement is very normal. Faculty members move around. So we move. Sometimes you move from one university to another. You graduate from one university. Typically, you have to move to a different university. These kind of movements are important because it facilitates the transfer of ideas. It facilitates linkages and reduces the cost of communication. Say I graduate from Florida State. And it's easier for me, when I come to Ohio State, it's easier for me to establish a communication channel between the two universities. It's very natural. We're a human being, we have local connections, and that kind of distance could be shortened by these kind of network linkages through your own move around, right? If you map all these career linkages into one holistic map, that's what I would call a leadership transfer network or career path network, right? So there's a lack of attention in literature. That's why I want to map these and study these. So in my own research, I have 2 studies that are using the career path as an edge and location as nodes. So the result is a career path network, or you can call it leadership transfer network. So the career path network have influence over policy diffusion, innovation, and diffusion. I have 2 hypotheses, which I don't, I probably do not want to present too much on this, but just to give you a visualization, these are from my other studies. Like this is a visualization of provincial governors and party secretaries and their career path networks over 15 years in China. You can see that they're connecting different provinces, and then people move around across location, and then it changes over time. My argument is when people move around, they're going to shorten the geographic distance between the 2 locations in terms of facilitating policy similarity, right? So although these 2 are thousands of miles away, I would think of them as neighbors, right? So in geography, always there's a discussion about spatial contagion. You typically think of your neighbors that are going to have that spatial similarity, but in in the policy world, when you're paying attention, sometimes you pay attention to neighbors. They're thousands of miles away. Just think of them as your neighbor. So this provides an explanation of when you learn from across geographic locations, where are you going to target that attention? So that's sort of my mapping of this kind of where it starts. And I also have a study of the U.S. This is Florida study. I study how city managers move around. Of course, this is you can see that in South Florida. This is the Miami metropolitan area, right? There's a lot of cities. Every a few blocks there's a city. You can see the city managers move around, jump around. Every 2 or 3 years they move to a new job. So I argue that this is going to have an implication on policies. And so I did have these different hypotheses. Basically, we can map that 2 jurisdictions, jurisdiction J, where there's a policy innovation, and when that person moves around to a new location that's an ego, then that person is going to carry with her the new knowledge to the new location. When the new location's policy becomes similar to the previous one, we think that the person was carrying the new policy around. Probably not an appropriate example, coronavirus, right? So the person was carrying from this place to the new place, right? So it's like the person can also carry policies or ideas. So that's sort of the portable innovation hypothesis. But there's also an alternative mechanism which I term it, yes? As a policy wormhole hypothesis. This was borrowing from astrophysics, so that in which they have 2 locations, like a worm was chewing through the apple, shorten the distance between 2 locations. I was arguing that if an agent was moving between one location and another, and then the innovation does not have to be happening before the movement. After the movement, the 2 locations are connected some way, so that the new location is going to pay attention to the original location, so that their policies tend to be similar because of the movement. So that I call it a wormhole hypothesis. Just think of this as, say, I graduated from FSU and came to Ohio State. So whatever FSU does after my graduation, I'm going to pay attention to that. So Ohio State will be similar to FSU to some extent. Even though I didn't carry that here, I'm still paying attention to the original location. So you can explain the correlation between the 2 locations because of the change movement of agents. So this could be coded into a panel data, which can be further tested in traditional econometric analysis. So this is another mechanism which I don't want to spend time. So for this study, I just basically want to test similar mechanism, but not look at diffusion, but I look at collaboration. But at the same thing, I look at the movement of managers to see how does that affect the collaboration between two jurisdictions. Of course, in the local level, there's a significant amount of fragmentation. The collaboration is one way to solve that horizontal, vertical, and functional fragmentation among government agencies. And so I argue that the career path network are going to reduce the cost in establishing collaboration across jurisdictions. Say if Columbus wants to collaborate with Worthington, if there's a manager moving around, it's going to be easier. Or if the Columbus have a movement to Indianapolis, right? So they're going to be easier because even though they're further away. Have a network definition. An agent is a professional company manager who has influence over policy decisions, and then they have opportunity to move from jurisdiction J to I, and then which may or may not be a neighbor to J. And then in this network analysis terminology, jurisdictions are nodes, and agents are the edges. Okay, hypothesis. So two jurisdictions are more likely to establish more interlocal environmental agreements when agents' career path connects them. So that's the hypothesis, which is very straightforward. So basically, if cities X and city Y, if they move from X to Y, they're more likely going to have a collaboration. And there's also an indirect effect, so that if the person moves from X to Y and then Y to Z, then also X and Z are also more likely going to collaborate. So you say if I move from Florida, to Tallahassee to Columbus, and then if I find a new job, say in Beijing, right? So then I'm not only creating a linkage between Columbus and Beijing, but also creating a new linkage between Tallahassee and Beijing because of my work experience. So that's sort of my second hypothesis. I test this eventually I got to my context here, which is Guangdong, China. I study these major cities, 13 different cities in the Pearl River Delta. And this region accounts for a huge portion of China's export. If you go to Walmart, a lot of products are produced here in Dongguan, right? It's a heavily industrial city where there's this has very complete industrial chain, but there's a need of collaboration because policy actions taken by one city is going to affect other cities. There's a need for within region consolidation and collaboration. So some kind of collaboration could happen in different forms. One is through signing interlocal environmental agreement. Say, these are flowing. This is the Pearl River Delta region. This river is flowing this way and also this way. So, say if there's heavy industrial development here, you have to compensate the upper stream so that they do not they can protect their water. So there's a tendency they want to work with each other. There's a need to that they need to work together, and there's also problems in enforcement because definitely these lower stream government the provincial government will evaluate them based on their ranking in the environmental performance. Say I want you to achieve a certain threshold in percentage water pollution over unit GDP, and then if you're ranked low, the city mayor will get punished, or at least they will not be rewarded through promotion. So that kind of a mechanism, we're also pushing them to enhance their performance. So this is the study context. Look at these prefecture level cities to see, to see how do they work together. There's also other ways that they can work together in addition to interlocal agreement. They can sign contract. They can also pay visit to each other. They pay visit, say, the city of this city paid a visit to Guangzhou because they want to see what's going on in this city by host intercity official meeting. The mayors will bring a team, to visit the mayors and his team in Guangzhou, and so that we learn from each other, have discussions, to explore opportunities for collaboration. So I look at these different forms of collaboration, especially the formal collaboration, as my dependent variable, explain how do you work, why do you work together, and code it as a 0 and 1s. Okay, so it's a panel data set of 14 cities in Pearl River Delta region in Guangdong province. It's a panel data from 2009 to 2015. I use undirected dyadic panel count model. It's very long. That means I have a panel first, and then I match each city with another city to form a dyad. So that dyad is treated as my unit of analysis instead of individual city. In that way, I can measure at the dyad level, do they have agreement or not? If there's agreement, it's coded as 1. If there's no agreement, it's 0. If it's 3 agreement, it's coded as 3. And this is also temporal, so we have a temporal dimension. And I can definitely, if it's a count model, I can use Poisson, negative binomial, zero inflated, negative binomial. This is my dependent variable, which is, but for each dyad, whether they have an interlocal agreement. And then these A and C is agent network collaboration to capture whether there's a transfer between the two cities. If there's a the local mayor was moved from a different city, I argue that they are more likely going to have more collaboration because China is heavily influenced by policymakers' individual characteristics, and there's a lack of rule of law, right? So that's even more relevant in Chinese context than in the U.S. If it's in the U.S., you have to argue that this policy is directly linked to the person's personality in some way. Otherwise, this effect will be very minimal. Because if it's a rule of law process, and then this influence should be not as significant as in the context in which the human beings and policymakers' influence is heavier, right? So anyway, I control for other variables, say the similarity between two cities in terms of socioeconomic, demographic, finance, geographic. I measure the distance between two cities so that if they're closer to each other, I argue that they're more likely going to have agreement as compared to two cities that are further away. This could be controlled in the model by measuring the distance between the two cities. Okay. Anyway, here's the model. So if it's zero inflated negative binomial model, then it has two stages. The first stage is a logic model to predict 0 and 1s. So to predict whether the two cities have agreement or not. So I included the population, GDP, and distance. So basically, I argue that geographic distance, first predict whether there's agreement or not. So basically, the model tells you geography matters and dominates, right? and so that if two cities are too further away, there's no chance for them to collaborate, right? Say for this city and this city, they might want to talk to each other, but it's just too far away that they may not want to even enter into agreement. But my argument is here, once you enter into an agreement based on the results, this collaboration between this career path between the two cities are going to make it easier to have more agreement. So geography determines whether you have agreement or not, and then once you have agreement, the familiarity between the two locations can make it more likely for the two locations to have more collaboration. So that's sort of the explanation, and based on the results, it shows that. So because the direct effect is significant, indirect effect is also significant. Obviously, the previous interlocal agreement also are shaping future collaborations. So you have previously two cities work together, it's more likely for them to have more collaboration in the future. So that's sort of past dependence, and it's for temporal autocorrelation effect. And also calculate the similarity between two locations in terms of their other characteristics. Obviously, some are significant, some are not, but that's not really relevant, not too much important for my study, but rather that I find support for the influence of the career path in shaping the number of agreements between two cities. Yeah, so that's pretty much it for my for this presentation. I don't know how much time I have, so I do have a few other studies that I'm doing. This is sort of the career path network in the U.S. and in China. This is the U.S. map for managers. Looks in 30 years in the U.S. For cities with population over 25K in the U.S. And this looks like does not look like a network, but rather yeah, like lines, right? Career chain. In sociology, they call them a career chain. This is in China, the Yangtze River Delta. They also have movement of city mayors around across different geographies. I have a study that's studying this. Okay, that's pretty much it for my presentation.
Opening it up for questions.
So you said that the rule of law would potentially reduce the impact of the factor that you're. What did you call the variable? The ANC or AM?
Yeah, ANC is I call it agent network collaboration, and then it's basically I'm measuring the career path.
Yeah.
But I call it a model, which is called an agent network collaboration model.
So the impact of the career path network is reduced by the rule of law. But I'm wondering, in the context of China, what is isn't there some degree of endogeneity in relation to the kind of like over the managing of city managers by the CCP or national level or even regional level political bodies. So perhaps there's some intention to that movement of people, be it as a mode of punishment or as a mode of like this, but like promoting managers who have done well.
Yeah.
Everything.
So there's different motivations for that movement, which could be interesting in and out of itself for studying. I do have a study that I'm, trying to extend this kind of work to see, say in China, there's the outbreak of coronavirus in Wuhan, and the mayor, the party secretary of the Wuhan city was, get fired. I don't know where he's moving. He's definitely fired, but he's still in the system. He's not fired. Perceived he's going to be somewhere to serve a different role, because for him, he's not committing a political error. He's still following the orders. So even though he's not a good mayor, he's definitely, it's unlike if you have a corruption, you're done. Your career is done. But it sounds, which is really odd for the U.S. This is the biggest error you can make in not being able to take care of the public health crisis. But in China, his political career is still alive. And so then they move a mayor from party secretary from Shandong province, from Jinan city, and then to Wuhan to serve as the party secretary. So that would be considered for that person to serve as new mayor of new party secretary of Wuhan. That's a promotion because you're going there to take care of this situation. Unless you're strong, they wouldn't move you around to do that. So that would be considered. There's some underlying motivation that they want to solve a problem, so that it's driving that process. But this study, there's a potential endogeneity because you don't know whether the upper level move that person around to achieve this end goal or not. There's something that I want to explore next to see. If we study that as a phenomenon, whether we can have a different conclusion or have a two-stage model to control for the potential endogeneity or something. But that's definitely a legitimate question to ask. Yes.
You were mentioning like your network wormhole idea. Does that appear often in like the network analysis or like SNA literature? Because I've run into it before. I thought it was really interesting.
The wormhole idea was, I proposed it.
Oh, that's what I've heard.
So I just published last year. Let's see, where is it? Yeah, so that's in this paper. I have this idea: portable innovation, policy wormholes, and innovation diffusion. It's basically studying the Florida data to see how managers move around. Do they carry ideas around and test it in a panel data setting to see, if after your movement, do you still learn from your original workflows?
Right.
So that's sort of copying the idea, not sort of learning from the idea from actual physics, but this sort of capture when geography matters, and then it's not neighboring diffusion, but rather it's across distant locations. This wormhole idea gives you a mechanism to explain that, which will be somehow helpful to explain a lot of phenomena.
Yeah. I was thinking of it in like the disease context. You can have disease wormholes that way too.
Yeah. Disease, like if you have somebody from, hopefully not. Right? So in this, we don't want to have too many wormholes. One can contain. But if once you have a wormhole, then you have a neighboring diffusion, right? So, which is, depressing to even think about. But this could be applied to many different contexts. I'll be happy to chat with you about this. This something that I'm very passionate about. Hopefully, can develop into further research, and this could be something that can link to the science of geography or humanities of geography. I don't know much about geography to say whether it's a science or humanity. I guess there's a disagreement within the. Yes.
When you talk about this, I was wondering if there are places where you've seen where like that transfer of agent has actually been an obstacle as opposed to facilitating, like, so where they're like, I mean, even if it's just personality differences, they're like, oh, at FSU, yeah, the person that published that paper, I knew him, his science was bad, or he was a jerk, or whatever, and so then it ends up not facilitating, having the opposite.
Yeah, so really, like, this goes back to his argument that whether this movement was a positive movement, or because when people hire you, do they want you or not? Or sometimes you have a jerk who's hiding his or her personality, and that person gets hired because their new colleagues do not know their personality. Once they're hired, it's, well, we shouldn't have never hired this person, right? And then that kind of thing really happened. And also when in the context of managers, when you move to a new place, say someone got fired, moved to a new place, that person may have anger and tremendous amount of unhappiness, and they can just deter the diffusion of ideas. Or if they have a bad relationship with their previous colleague, right? Say I came from FSU, my professor didn't treat me well. I never even want to refer to FSU as my home institution, right? So once I'm gone, I got my degree, I'm gone forever. I don't even want to mention my professor. But that's also possible. So here, I mentioned in the paper, there's a significant limitation. I hope I have assumption that people tend to have positive relationship, which may or may not be true. But that's something that you can test. This could be included in, by if you have a survey data, you can ask, do you have good relationship with your previous colleague? And then how likely are you going to carry that around? That could be complemented with survey data. But I think let's go back to the China context. If we can just do a refinement of the data to see whether the movement are purely promotional or at least horizontal or positive. And then the argument is you have old colleagues in your old places. Therefore, when you're facilitating collaboration, it's a lot easier. If the goal is collaboration, then it's possible that they can do that. Because in China, the network is much denser. Because interpersonal relationship there is much more important than the U.S. I would say in the U.S. it's 50-50. Have capable and also have networks. It's 50, but in China it's like 70%. is based on relationship and 30% capability. Maybe the percentage could be changed, but I just want to argue that in the US, relationship matters, but not as important does not matter as much as in China or other Asian contexts in which there's more context dependent and then the relationship matters much more there. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, I was going to ask a question to follow up on that.
Yes.
Right, because what that does is it suggests that there's, I mean, if there's, if one of these maybe impressions people often have of the Chinese state is where policies come down vertically, implemented at the local levels, various rules and every sort of sub-pieces of each policy are kind of parceled out to the minions. And so it's very much this way. We're suggesting that there's something that's happening on the horizontal axis. And so I'm just wondering, like, is carrying a policy idea from one place to another, is it really something that people bring with them, or is it something that's, they have to do it because this is a policy handed down from above? And as we know, the Chinese system being very hierarchical.
Yeah.
If they have to execute policy A in place, city 1, they also have to do it in city 2.
Yeah.
So then the operation or the mechanism of transfer seems not necessarily geographical per se, but actually something that originates in the state structure.
Yeah, so I do not argue against that fact that it could be, the movement itself. This still goes back to his argument that if the movement itself was driven by an upper idea, and then they can design it so that if you move from this place to another, you're going to do something that the upper level government expects you to do. Just like the case that's currently happening in Wuhan is like they move a manager from Shanghai, the provincial party secretary from Shanghai to Hubei, so that expecting that person is going to be strong and very tough. And he actually did it that way, right? Because the signal the central government senses was a few months ago, he implemented a restricted recycling program in Shanghai, making a lot of people in Shanghai not very happy because they just say in a week everyone should have a classification of waste. We no longer will take waste if you don't classify them. And in every neighborhood should, they just give them a very short period of time so that they can have to do that. He's a very hardline policymaker. And obviously when the central government is thinking about if right now in Hubei they're not doing well, when I move this manager, that manager will go to do some policy in this public health area is going to be similar to what has been doing in environmental area, to be a hardline, very efficient, but also crushing the non-compliant people, and then so that's sort of why somehow similar to the mechanism that if the upper level people want to do that, and this could be shaping that pattern. So I think for me, for this study, this could be like there's a lot of things to examine, especially to use this movement itself as a dependent variable to see whether the upper level leaders are shaping that, that can link to provide a further opening of the black box. I just provide a one step further explanation of this. Maybe there's something else that's driving this, and that could be studied using the movement itself as a dependent variable to see why they move and what's the driving mechanism. Of course, there's studies to study the factions of leaders in China. They say if you're promoted under a leader, then whenever your leader moved to a different place, then you're going to move with that leader, or that then if your policies are going to be similar to your principle in some way if you're promoted under that person. So that they call that patronage network. But that's sort of a different idea than this. But that's sort of more highlighting the vertical aspect. But I think these two could be combined somehow into a more coherent framework. But that's an interesting phenomenon to explore further. Yes?
So, speaking of diffusion, I mean, since DJ asked you the very first question about conditional entity, we're all kind of asking the same question in different ways. So it's the same starting point, you end up getting stuck there. So I say that because my question is the same question again, a different way. So in the early part of your talk, when you laid out the theoretical framework, you made a claim which I wrote down, which was that interlocal collaboration is essentially a response to horizontal fragmentation of metropolitan government.
Yeah.
And when I wrote that down, I wrote in the margin CCP question mark, question mark. Because it seems to me like, if I understood what you just said in response to Max, that it may be that this is correct, but that at another level, metropolitan governance is not really the object of your analysis, but it's something like the operation of power through the party. But to understand that, metropolitan governance is not necessary, it's not a direct way of understanding it, it's a secondary way of getting at it. And so that makes me ask the big questions like, what do you really want to know? Do you really want to know why people move around in their networks, or are you trying to understand how the Chinese state works? Or something else? Because from what I can tell, if I'm following your question, you're saying that would be really interesting, but
Yeah.
why?
Yeah, the thing I want to know is the mechanisms surround the movement of agents and their impact on governance.
Well, why should we, no offense, but like, who cares about that really? I mean, why should we care about that?
The fact we care about it is, from our own discipline, we care about managers.
Okay.
It's the public administration. We care about how do we recruit managers that are potentially effective in innovation, so that in looking at the pattern, you're going to identify who are likely going to be innovative by seeing, if I want to establish a collaboration between Ohio State and Penn State, then likely we're going to establish link. Actually, when we're hiring people, there's some intention behind that motivation. Say, if this person was graduated from a prestigious program, not only because the person is strong, but there's some way that we can learn from that institution through the chain movement of people. So that's one aspect. The second aspect is that the movement, essentially this is something in geography and also in political science. There's a lot of studies that study diffusion that say, hey, this mechanisms are pretty much geography-based. And then it explains a lot when there's a spread locally, right? But you cannot explain when there's a planting of the seed from a remote jurisdiction, the wormhole effect. This provides an explanation of that when you really know when that seed was planted. It provides a potential mechanism to explain that. Of course, there's especially for the Chinese context, it could be something to discuss. But also for the U.S. context, the issue of endogeneity is always an issue. But I do not, in the study is still correlational. But I think this is something that can be further developed. Of course, this has a lot of facial validity based on our own experiences, but simply we do not have empirical evidence or empirical setup to test these. But when we see this, coupled with our own experiences, it does make sense that people carry ideas around. We recruit people because they could potentially carry them, and then so there's something that has an implication that explains the cross-location diffusion of ideas that cannot be explained with traditional, geographic diffusion. Or say if you use a spatial regression, then you use spatial metrics. Then spatial metrics are going to capture spatial proximity. And then when you have a mechanism that's sort of diffusing from a distant location, that there's no theory, or perhaps I think in geography there's many theories for this, but just my cursory understanding, there could be a potentially one theory of that that's explained across geography learning. But I'm pretty sure in political science there's not much of an explanation for this in political science. I'm pretty sure in geography there's a better way of explaining this. But yeah, that's a long answer to your question.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Yes.
Is there anything unique in the environmental context? I'm wondering whether the impact on collaboration from this movement will be different for environmental policy making or other policy making. Maybe the directions are similar, but what about the magnitude?
Yeah. Magnitude might be different, and then it also will be different, in relation to how responsive the system is to policy making. Some of the policy areas are more, they change more slowly than other areas, or the policymakers tend not to pay attention. So the assumption here is the top leader are paying attention to environmental area, which may or may not be the case, right? So if you're a mayor in the previous city, a lot of things were done by your lower level officials. You may not be aware of what's happening in your department, in your own city. Just like if you're a dean of a school, you may not know every syllabus, right? and so that could be the case. So there's something that could be examined. So say if you have experience with environmental area, then it's more likely that you're going to copy that idea around. But this, a lot of these could be tested, with different contexts, and especially if you see environment, public health, crisis management, and different, social policy, and these are, could have different mechanisms there. Yes.
So I was also thinking, the level you're studying at is mayors and city managers. It's kind of like I'm wondering, like, two questions is like how much, like, the mid-level bureaucrat kind of jobs that you're just mentioning, what would be, is there probably is no way of measuring it, but I'm sure that would have a significant impact. But also, like, do people, when they move around, do they bring their teams with them? Like, is it a situation where, like, somebody's hired and they bring all their assistants and stuff? And I don't know, maybe that would be a factor in whether or not that move actually has an impact.
Yeah. So that could be an additional thing to provide more detail. But if that's still within this framework, right? So people move around and carry with them ideas, and the team is only going to make that stronger, that effect stronger. So I think that's something to study. I was even thinking about the movement of, because in our academia, in our discipline, when you see cases in which you have your mentor move to a new place, and then when you first find your job, your mentor to move to a different university, if you're strong enough, they may hire you again in a new location. I even had somebody who's like, the mentor student become university president, and they hire the mentor hire his other students that have a lab just in one place. That's really odd, but that did happen, right? So I would say this is sort of, I was really interested in this kind of phenomena, looking at how people move around. Does this have impact on policy making, decision making, and this could happen even like coaches in the football coach tree, right? See like Urban Meyer and Ryan Day, these kind of movement of coaches across the location. This could be a perfect setting to test this idea if we're to study university athletics. That should be fun. Yes.
So this movement of officials in China has a long history, right? So
Yeah.
I mean, it's official policy to move officials around several thousand years, right?
Yeah.
So there's, and obviously the situation is very different now, but there's still that legacy, right?
Yeah.
And I'm struggling to remember the study, but I've seen similar things where people have asked the question, historically looking through the gazetteers,
Yeah.
local gazetteers, and tracking movements of county level officials
Yeah.
on carrying out of capital punishment
Yeah.
in different places.
Oh, that would be interesting in reading that. Obviously, in sociology, there's a scholar who studied the county level officials in Jiangsu province, and then the township level to see how officials move up the bureaucracy over time, and also across jurisdictions. Of course, in China, there are 2,000 years of movement. Originally, they were thinking about avoiding that local official have a local interest group. Right? So because there's no election, then if you become a local official for a long time, there's no checks and balances, then you're going to ruin the local economy because you will not become a local emperor. So the central government wants to move these people around so that they do not form local monopoly of power, so that move these people around. You can track this for 2,000 years. Actually, someday, like before I retire, someday, like 5 years before I retire, I want to study this from a historical perspective, to study the local gazetteer and the tombstone or something, to study how people move around through 2,000 years, to see that if the mechanisms are similar or not, right? So the modern mechanism versus the old mechanism. Do they all hold true? If they hold true, then that means the modern China is still an old China, right? And right, so there's an argument that I personally do not think the mechanism changes much. So although the communist mechanism are similar, are new as compared to the traditional Chinese system, but the movement of officials and the personnel management and the concentration of power, these are all similar to traditional Chinese governance. So it's something that I'll be interested in studying, like after in 10 years or 20 years, that'll be something fun to study. Not for environment, not for public administration or public policy, just for fun. Yeah. Other questions or comments, critique? Or just in general, I just like your feedback on, because my cursory of the geography was, I didn't know whether there's a, coverage on this. Am I right in the characterization of the interlocation? If it's like further distant away, are there explanations for that from geography, or do people even pay attention to that at all? Or is it, I know that from geography there is a theory of space is more than geography is more than space, or space is more than geography or something. There's yeah, I don't know.
There's some work done on policy stuff like well, what I was thinking was like Jamie Peck's past policy, like
Policy.
yeah, policy diffusion, past policy. Like you were remembering one.
Eric Shepard, the wormhole paper, 2000, globalization is a wormhole. It's not specific to agent transfer agent issues. It's more about economic objects.
Okay.
We used to have a geographer in the department named Larry Brown, who back in the 80s, you might have come across him. He wrote a huge amount of different objects.
Okay. And you mentioned about the concept wormhole. Was it proposed in economics?
Economic geography.
Economic geography.
Yeah, by economic geography.
Oh, okay. I didn't even cite that paper. I thought this was something that I
I'll
came
send
up
you the reference.
Okay. Yeah. Because I only cited Einstein and and Hawking, right? And I thought that that's something just fun to bring into public policy. But I want to read that paper. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Yes.
Yeah, I just I think there's at least one person I know that's working on kind of spatial social network. So I'm not sure it's relevant enough to check for. I can send you later who your address. Previously,
Okay. All right. Please do send me an email.
yeah, she's working more on like immigration, and so like trust base.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. For me, the context is important, but I'm also interested in the mechanism, something that I can further develop. Of course, the Chinese context is really fascinating, gives you a lot of data, and something. I have a student tracking all the city managers' movement in China. There's something that's developed. I can use more advanced modeling for that. That's across all Chinese cities. That's something fun to do. Yes.
So this work that you're doing in China, from one of the slides at the beginning, you said it's focusing on local sustainability.
Yep.
So is this only about like sustainability policy, or can it be applied to all different kinds of policy? And then my other question is, can you use this to see if some policy is moving faster to different areas and some move slower?
Yep.
Depending on the type.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So first of all, this is applied to local sustainability, environment policy. But of course, if I would use the same template for the paper for other policy areas and wouldn't affect my hypothesis. Although if you have different policy areas coded, you can find different coefficient size, and then obviously faster and slower, stronger effect, a smaller effect, then based on different types. And then that kind of across policy area study will be really fascinating, and that should be doable. But I think the hypothesis will be, I would hold them pretty similar to this. but I can explore that dynamics that you suggested, which one is faster, which one is slower. But for this scale of analysis, just too much for coding. I need more students to do work for me. Otherwise, I would, it just simply too much to do. But that's really a doable idea.
Do you have RA money?
Yeah, some money, but not sufficient to hire that many students to do all policy areas. But maybe one policy area, so the coding of this and exploring how the model side of it works took us a lot of time because the model was not done this way before, especially for the spatial. This paper, China paper, I had a spatial temporal model. You guys might be familiar with that. I changed the spatial matrix into a metric matrix. I have two matrices in the model, a spatial matrix and the metric matrix, so that I estimate the effect of it. But first, understanding how the spatial matrix works, and then alongside with the metric matrix, it takes a lot of time for the coding and also thinking through the process. So that was on the methodological part. That takes a lot of time to be a partial geographer and also be a policy scholar who care about this movement of officials and also about China. So, yeah.
Great. All right, I think we need to stop there, but thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you.